I have to admit, I'm kind of late to the Souls party. My first Dark Souls was 3 and I played it 10 years ago on the Xbox One with my best friend. We took turn playing when the other person died. Years later, I came back to finish the game on PC, and while I was at it, I also played through Dark Souls 1. You can check out the video after this one. As an outsider to the Souls fandom, my impression of Dark Souls 2 has always been that it's the worst out of the 3 games and just isn't worth the time. I'm sure you've seen all the videos critiquing as well as defending Dark Souls 2.
Alright, I'm going to watch this video because it's going to make me mad. It's a video called Dark Souls 2 is Epic.
I have a confession to make. I like Dark Souls 2.
You fucking idiot. I hate this guy.
People go on for hours arguing over this game till this day, despite it being released more than 10 years ago. It's undeniable that the game has something that captivated the FromSoftware audience, for better or worse. Then, I learned that the director of Dark Souls 2 is also involved in the making of Elden Ring. Admittedly, it got me to question my perception of the game. If someone helped make Elden Ring, then their previous work couldn't have been horrible, right? The hour-long YouTube essays also kinda somewhat convinced me that Dark Souls 2 is much better than people gave it credit for. So, I decided to try the game out for myself to see if Dark Souls 2 is really that bad. A bit of context for Dark Souls 2. Unlike its predecessor, the game had quite a turbulent development cycle. The version that I played for the video, Scholar of the First Sin, is actually a rework of the original game with all the DLCs included. The original Dark Souls 2 was announced on the 7th of December 2012 at the Spike Video Game Awards show. The game's development started around September 2011, same month as the release of Dark Souls 1. The idea was that regardless of its reception, Namco Bandai and FromSoftware would continue milking the Dark Souls games until it's no longer profitable. This went against Dark Souls 1 director Hidetaka Miyazaki's vision, which was that Dark Souls didn't need a sequel. But at the time, Miyazaki was just a game director at FromSoftware, so he lacked the executive power to go against decision from corporate. Before the project started, Miyazaki stepped away from the development of Dark Souls 2, which gave him the opportunity to direct Bloodborne, but that's another story. For now, Dark Souls 2 was entrusted to in-house game director Tomohiro Shibuya. Due to reasons that were never made public or even alluded to by any staffs during any interviews, Shibuya was removed from the project around 2013. You can see a stark reduce in his interviews appearances leading up to 2013 until he vanished from promo materials and events altogether. The leadership was then given to Yui Tanimura, another director of FromSoftware. As a result, the project underwent a near total reboot just over a year before the release deadline in Q1 2014. Information about this reboot was not entirely public, and we only have the E3 2013 gameplay and the Tokyo demo footage to go from, but it's enough to see that the game was scaled back significantly and important features were cut. The game was also not very well optimized and lacked the visual polish of Dark Souls 1. On release, Dark Souls 2 was a big disappointment to fans of the first game. The decision to change the director and do a reboot midway through development also made itself painfully evident in the gameplay, which we're about to get into right now. I hope this provided some perspective on why Dark Souls 2 is such a black sheep among the Souls game. By the way, for this experience, I picked the Scholar of the First Sin edition because it includes all the DLCs in this package. I also went into this offline. I simply don't care about the PvP or co-op aspect of Souls game. I want to lock myself in the asylum alone and figure out what kind of person I am. Let's start directly with the gameplay of Dark Souls 2, since it's the most contentious topic when it comes to the discussion about the game. After playing and finishing the game myself, I have to say, Dark Souls 2 is not the worst thing ever made by FromSoftware. But it's also not exactly a good game either. To me, it's a mediocre game with really interesting ideas. In Dark Souls 1, the game made the point that warping between bonfires, or in other words, unrestrained fast traveling, is only available to the player after they've acquired the Lord Vessel, which is about halfway through the game. This feature is a way to restrict the player's movement in the early game so that they have to engage with the world itself and not a menu screen. This is complemented by the ingenious world design of Dark Souls 1, making exploration in the first half of the game genuinely a transcendent experience. Dark Souls 2 chose a different path. The game views exploration not as the gameplay, but as a mean to get you to the gameplay. This is evident in the linear and stretched out level design of areas such as the Cardinal Tower in Forest of the Fallen Giants, or the Shrine of Amana. Even if you have no idea where to go, it's hard to be lost in Dark Souls 2 because there's only one way forward and back. The only two areas where you could have some troubles with navigation are Shaded Woods and the Gutter, and that's because your vision is severely limited in there. There's not a lot of branching paths across the levels either. On top of that, you can also teleport between the discovered bonfires with no extra cost. Getting around in Dark Souls 2 is infinitely more convenient than Dark Souls 1. Now, to me personally, I think it's an interesting reinterpretation of the world design. Dark Souls 1 wants you to immerse yourself in its world, so the game drops you into an interconnected sandbox and lets you figure your way out. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, wants to test your endurance and adaptability by placing roadblocks on a winding path. The puzzle now becomes, how do I get past these clusters of enemies instead of where the hell do I go? I can see why a lot of Dark Souls 1 fans don't like the combat-focused approach, because you could argue that it takes away the magic of the world and turns it into a guided tour. And that's valid criticism, since half the magic of Dark Souls 1 is stumbling on something that's significant to the narrative and learn about it in context later. But I think the visual of Dark Souls 2 is compelling enough to make up for the lack of organic exploration. Another great feature of Dark Souls 2 is the torch system. Dark Souls 2 is a dark game, both in themes and lighting, especially the latter. In some areas, you can't even see 10 steps ahead of you, so there's always the risk of falling to your death or running headfirst into an ambush. That's where the torch system comes in. Instead of being a utility weapon like in Dark Souls 1 or 3, the torch is now a consumable resource that you can use to light up certain areas, and they stay lit up despite the bonfire reset. I really like this feature of Dark Souls 2. It's a very unique way to communicate progress to the player. In Dark Souls 1, your progress in a location is measured by the bonfires and shortcuts you have found, and then the boss fight at the end. It's the same here in Dark Souls 2, except you can leave your imprint on the world. The torches aren't just tools to make navigation easier, they're proof of your presence, that you have been here and conquered whatever challenge Drangleic threw at you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to light them. The flickering torches symbolize your triumph over the darkness that has swallowed the far corners of the world. It's a very interesting parallel to the overarching objective of Souls game, which is to rekindle the first flame and push back the undead curse. On a meta level, I think it's also the game slowly conditioning you to relink the fire. You've spent the entire game lighting torches, relinking the fire is essentially just lighting a giant torch, with yourself as the fuel. Even though the fire would eventually fade again, that's not something you have to worry about since you've finished your duty. It makes the choice to let darkness consume the world that much harder to choose, because the game lets you associate fire and light with safety and comfort, and now you will be the one to usher in the thing that you spent the entire game fighting against. In all Souls games, you have some form of weapon durability. This decreases with use, and after it hits 0, the weapon breaks, and you have to repair it to deal normal damage again. The weapons in Dark Souls 2 on average have lower durability compared to the other two Souls games, and that durability decreases every time you hit anything, even a wall. On the surface, this seems like an annoying thing. If you don't pay attention, your equipment will break really quickly and repairing them is not cheap, especially in the early game. But if you think about it, this change actually does a lot of good. In the early game, you haven't found a lot of weapons. The low durability forces you to be mindful of your playstyle. Every attack must be a conscious decision, otherwise you're one step closer to running back to the last bonfire and resetting your progress. You could also press on with reduced damage, making future challenges even harder than they are. As you progress through the game, you will find different weapons. The low durability now serves as motivation for you to try all the weapons you have found, so you can avoid having to warp back to Majula to get repairs. It adds variety to the monotonous playstyle of many Souls fans where they just stick with one weapon the entire game. You could also do that in Dark Souls 2, but it would require more effort and resources. This low durability also validates the existence and usage of repair powder. In the other two Souls games, I couldn't recall any moment where I need to use repair powder, but in Dark Souls 2, it's become an important consumable to have on standby. Items like fire bombs or resins also became more useful, since doing more damage means you would have to use your weapons less often, making them last longer between two bonfires. Overall, the approach of Dark Souls 2 to durability forces the player to adopt a dynamic playstyle where using multiple weapons and consumable items regularly is the standard. The last thing I find really intriguing about Dark Souls 2 gameplay is adaptability, or the ADP stat. To me, the inclusion of this stat is a cool idea that's severely undercooked. For your information, before I became a Souls fan, I was a huge RPG nerd. Morrowind was my favorite Elder Scrolls game, and in that game, the stats of your character influence how you interact with the game world in general. If you invest in a skill, you do it better and get much better results. Invest in a weapon skill and you're not just doing more damage, your attacks also land more often, and they're harder for enemies to dodge or parry them, for example. It's a classic RPG mechanic. Pushing the Souls formula in that direction could be a very interesting choice. Stats can play a much more involved role in how you play the game in general, Imagine investing in strength, and at a certain point, heavy weapons have a different, much faster and powerful moveset because of your investment. Higher agility lets you recover stamina much faster, move faster, and have a different rolling animation. And because these stats change the game in such fundamental ways, choosing which to invest and which to ignore would add even more variety to the gameplay. And we could go all day, but you get my point. I think if Tanimura had received the director role from the start of Dark Souls 2 development, we could have had a much more fleshed out stat system like the ADP stats, but due to time constraint, that's the only thing that they could include to conform to his vision of Dark Souls 2. So the stat sticks out like a sore thumb in the game. Everything else just offer a number advantage, and then you have a stat that decides how well you would roll and how many iframes you would have. It just doesn't really play well. But I'm sure you've heard all the complaints about this over the years, so I won't bore you by repeating them. Now that we've gotten the good stuff out of the way, I will complain about this game because oh boy does it have many things that I immensely dislike. I've been waiting for this. When I first started the game, I thought my biggest hurdle would be figuring out the control scheme for the PC version. After all, this is FromSoftware's first PC port. Surprisingly enough, it was quite intuitive. I just had to disable the double click to get rid of the input delay. Simple, right? Somehow I still got my teeth kicked in by random mobs. My character just didn't do the things I wanted him to do. Everything was still a tick slower or it wasn't happening at all. After 2 hours, I had to turn to the internet. Either I've suffered some phantom brain damage and can't play video game correctly anymore, or something about the control of Dark Souls 2 is fucked up. You see, in almost every video game ever, you press a button and something happens. That's the way it has been. That's what God intended when he created us humans. That's right, God created us, as well as Halo, Fallout New Vegas, and visual novel games. And when he did all that, the first commandment was that an action would be performed when the corresponding button is pressed. And what did FromSoftware do? They decided to spit on that. Some genius in the development team thought, wouldn't it be fun if the player character performs an action not when the player presses a button, but after that dumbass had released the thing? The moment I read that line on Google, I couldn't believe my eye. I immediately started the game, loaded into Majula, and I pressed the spacebar. Nothing happened until I let go of the key. My character did a roll. A slow, sad, and pathetic roll. For a moment I just sat there staring at the screen, my world collapsing around me. I was about to commit at least 20 hours of my life playing a Souls game in the most ass-backward way I could possibly think of. It's hard enough that I have to fight the camera movement on top of the enemies. Now I have to relearn how to play fucking video game. Me, a 25-year-old dog, have to learn a new trick. Every single combat encounter, every boss fight, every time I see a trap or a jumping puzzle, the first thought in my head wasn't, oh cool, what is this? Or oh wow, how interesting, how can I get there? No, it was, remember to release the fucking button after you press it. I have never been so unimmersed in something like this ever before. It's such a jarring way to play a game where every input counts and you have to be very precise with your action in order to not die or lose all your resources. Sure, you get used to it after about 10 to 15 hours, but it's no wonder why people think this game was clunkier than Dark Souls 1, because it is. It plays completely different. Normally, when you use a fast weapon in Souls game, you are at an advantage. You chain your clicks and the game would have a queue of inputs. Every action will be performed in the exact order you punch them in. In that way, you can spam them, creating the power fantasy of using a fast weapon. But here in Dark Souls 2, it's actually harder to play them. You have to click the attack button in a certain rhythm, otherwise your attack just won't chain and the thing that you're fighting gets a chance to hit you back. A heavy weapon is actually easier to use because you take 10 years to initiate an attack anyway. I think it's such a cheap way to make the game more difficult, if it was even intended as such. Instead of making enemies smarter or the terrain more tricky to navigate or 10 other ways to give the player a challenge, the game decides to make you swim with your arms tied behind your back. I'm sure it's doable, but it's annoying. The simple expectation of seeing something happen when a button is pressed was not fulfilled, and it soured the game for me. I also don't like some boss fight of Dark Souls 2. My problem is that the non-humanoid boss fights are bad. You see, Dark Souls 2 is often criticized for having too many dudes in armor for bosses and enemies in general. There's the Pursuer, the Dragon Riders, Velstad, the Looking Glass Knight, even Ornstein made a reappearance. I, for once, love these fights. They're perfect to showcase the tense and slow-paced combat of this game. And then you have the animal bosses. First of all, Royal Rat Authority. I was hoping for another Sith fight since they're both giant dogs that jump around in an arena, but what I got was a Temu version of that. I didn't even mind the smaller dogs, it's this piece of shit right here that's annoying. The dog has 4 attacks, 2 swipe, a jump that does damage and a dash that could knock you down. The first 3 attacks are fine, but the dash has next to no telegraph. The game is already slow, you have to time the button release by anticipating an attack, and now you can barely even see the fucking boss. You could say the Lost Sinner fight is the same. You fight in a dark room, and she's even faster. That's true, but she doesn't take up 3/4 of the screen when I look at her. And since she's humanoid, I can reliably hit her with my weapon and clearly see when she's winding up for a big attack. Another huge animal boss fight that's irritating is the Freya fight. A lot of people get distracted by the swarm of small spiders, but they're easy to get rid of with summons or AoE spells. The real issue is that this spider can only be hit on its 2 heads on each side. Not the legs, not the torso, just the 2 heads. And it also jumps around a lot, which makes it even harder to hit the heads. This is why I hate animal fights in Souls game. You're either fighting a crackhead that inflicts all kind of bad stats for you like bleed or petrification, or geriatric quadrupedal. The only fun animal fight was the Guardian Dragon, and that was because I got to fight the dragon, which is cool in itself already. When a non-humanoid boss fight is not annoying, it's just a flaccid moving mass. The Rotten, the Covetous Demon, and the Song Demon all melted into a blur of fighting a blob for me. I fought a blob that occasionally did something to knock me down. So I got up and swung my big stick at them till they died. Very underwhelming. And they're not even visually intriguing either. There's nothing about these bosses that made me wonder how they came to be like that. or you can glean some lore from their boss arena, but looking at them doesn't evoke any strong emotion. Like I fought Urgot from League of Legends, Jabba the Hutt, and Weird Paper the Frog. What are we doing here? The gimmick boss fight is, surprisingly enough, not terrible. I like the chariot mainly because of Happy Souls and how funny it made the fight, but it's essentially just a patience test. Overall, I'm quite disappointed in the boss roster of this game. The dude in armor fights are the absolute best ones, the rest are just very frustrating in an unfun way or plain boring. My final criticism of Dark Souls 2 is that the game doesn't have a good flow. Now I know this sounds a bit nebulous, but hear me out. Every pillar of a game, from combat to exploration to story and music, must all point the player forward. Going forward can mean progressing to the next level, area, or pushing the narrative to the next story beat. At no point during the game should the player feel like the mental cost of moving forward outweighs the excitement the game offers. But that's exactly what I felt like in many areas of Dark Souls 2. The linear nature of Dark Souls 2's world design already limited exploration in gameplay loop. The layout of each area can be different, but they don't really have a distinct feel to them. The only areas where I felt like I was truly in somewhere strange and new was the Dragon Shrine and the Shrine of Amana. The rest of the game just blended into a mega structure for me. The enemy placement also doesn't vary at all. Whenever you see an item on the ground or a semi-open area, there will be at least 5 to 7 mobs running at you like heat-seeking missiles. After your 3rd or 4th gauntlet, a bonfire and a fog gate will appear and you face the gatekeeper of that area. Looking back, I think that's the reason why I just wanted to rush the game after getting the 4 Great Souls. Seeing a new area doesn't elicit a strong reaction in me like the beginning, because subconsciously I've told myself that despite the cool facade, each new area will be the exact same as the last ones. Dark Souls 1 has an extremely simple gameplay loop. There's minimal NPC interactions, so you only have 2 modes, which are combat and sightseeing. That's why the world design is so multi-layered. It has to be that way to stretch the combat instances further apart from each other, so you don't get fatigued of playing the game. Dark Souls 2 makes you fight a lot. While the game's combat is great, the world is simply too flat and straightforward for the number of fights to feel natural. You're playing a game, and the game has monsters for you to fight, and Dark Souls 2 won't waste a single moment to remind you of this. You have next to no downtime to take in the world around you or just wander around. It's just attack, dodge, roll, Estus Flask, rinse and repeat. Out of the 3 Souls games, I had the most trouble immersing myself in Dark Souls 2 for this reason. The story is already simple, the combat is tough, and the world is set up not to draw you in, but to wear you down by pelting you with fights after fights. The music is fantastic, but Souls music has always been stellar, so I don't know if it helps much. The game doesn't flow well, and I think that's the result of the halfway reboot, as well as time constraint during development. Unlike the other 2 games, Dark Souls 2 actually has a fairly straightforward story. In fact, it has the most coherent story out of the 3 Souls games. The idea is very simple. Drangleic is in the same world as Lordran, the land of Dark Souls 1, though the events of that game happened many years before. Most of Dark Souls 1 events and characters were already forgotten or turned into myths by this point. But one constant remains, the undead curse. That's right, Drangleic had also suffered from the undead curse. The land has been so ravaged by it that when the game starts, there's barely anyone left. As the story slowly reveals itself, we learn that Vendrick, the king of Drangleic, had vanished some time ago. Without anyone to rekindle the flame nor snuff it out, the kingdom was left frozen in a state of decay. Nothing can truly live or die, as the only sentient beings left are undeads who haven't lost their mind yet. Our task as the totally not chosen undead is to become king of Drangleic and solve this issue. To achieve that, we need to gather 4 powerful souls scattered around the kingdom and ascend the Throne of Want. Along the way, we run into many NPCs who are adventurers from other kingdoms or even times. A lot of them will come to our aid during the boss fights, which I really enjoyed as it gave me a real sense of camaraderie. Aside from the core narrative, Dark Souls 2 allows you to tell your own story. You can tackle all the major bosses and areas in whatever order you want to. That's one of the things I really like about Souls game, and Dark Souls 2 did it very well. It gave you the perfect amount of exposition. You can dig into item descriptions, environment clues, and NPC dialogues to piece together events of the past, or you can just run past everything, swing at almost anyone, and beat the game all the same. It's all about playing the game in your own way, and from that an organic personal story will emerge. This part won't be too long because any praise of Dark Souls 1's story can be directly applied here. If anything, Dark Souls 2 tells story even more tastefully than the first game. they allude to events of the past but never directly mention any names, so if you had played the first game, you would get these very satisfying nods to characters like Gwyn and Ornstein and so on. What I find really compelling about the story of Dark Souls 2 is that even though it tells the same story as Dark Souls 1, the narrative focuses on very different themes. Dark Souls 2 is a story about the cycle of death and rebirth and the human obsession trapped within it. In the main game, we confronted two kings, which are the Iron King and then Vendrick. Both were immensely powerful monarchs in their prime. The Iron Keep and Drangleic Castle are both impressive structures that are visually intimidating. While they differ in aesthetic, both locations communicated the extent of power each of the two kings possess. The Iron King commanded a legion of Alon Knights, all decked out in extremely tough irons. His fortress and even the Smelter Demon are the results of the king's handy metalwork. Yet when the undead curse descended upon his kingdom, all of his effort to contain it failed miserably. Eventually, the king was killed by his own creation, the Smelter Demon. His corpse and the castle were all consumed by the molten iron underneath, at which point his soul was possessed by ancient evils, turning him into the horned demons that we fought at the bottom of the castle. King Vendrick suffered the same fate. Vendrick rose to power in the very same way we did, by slaying 4 great beings who contained the great souls of his time. He then subjugated the giants oversea, took their power and created golems, which are instrumental in building the impressive Drangleic Castle. Faced with the undead curse, Vendrick and his brother Oldia poured unthinkable amount of resources into soul research to cure it. Yet when we found him after defeating Velstadt, King Vendrick was reduced to a naked shambling corpse that drags his sword around as he walks in circle. The man who once ruled over Drangleic is now a pitiful hollow, doomed to rot in one place for eternity. His great kingdom is frozen in time, with only monsters and hollows roaming the roads. In the DLCs, we got to know the Ivory King and the Sunken King. Though their story differed, the endings are one and the same. Their kingdoms fell and they themselves lost everything, even their souls. This is the death part of the cycle. No matter how great their power was, even the mightiest kings of humanity can't escape the cyclical nature of things. A start guarantees an end. Any creation will be undone. It's only a matter of time. The best attempt at disrupting the cycle was Vendrick's. He refused to link the fire, knowing that one day it will fade again, the undead curse will be back and the future kingdoms will fall. Instead, he chose to either find a cure to the curse or go hollow himself. But even this is futile because the chosen undead, aka us, the players. If something dies, something else will be reborn to take its place. That is the second part of the cycle. As Drangleic came to a halt in time, an undead took it upon themselves to become the Lord of Light that Vendrick was supposed to be. They retread the same steps as the king once did, slaying 4 great beings for their souls, and ascended the throne of want, restarting the cycle of death and rebirth again. By playing and finishing the game, we are the second part of the cycle that completes it. Within this theme of cycles, however, there's another layer of storytelling. The characters of Dark Souls 2 told a story of obsession. Every character ended up in the place they did exactly because of their pursuits. The baneful Queen Mytha thought her king didn't love her because she wasn't beautiful enough. So she did everything to enhance her beauty, even poisoning herself. This, to no one's surprise, didn't work very well. Eventually, her obsession grew so strong, it altered her appearance, turning a once beautiful woman into a half-human, half-serpent hybrid. It's unclear what happened next, but the king fell and Mytha was beheaded. However, this did not kill her, probably thanks to all the poison coursing in her veins. So now she rules over Earthen Peak with her puppet servants. The entire place is inhabitable, filled with disfigured monsters, witches, and poison cloud. Mytha's obsession with outer beauty was the reason she could never obtain what she wanted, which was the love of her king and her people. The Iron King also had an obsession, but his was power. Starting as a small local lord, the Iron King went on conquest to build his kingdom. On his way, he found 2 treasures, the Knight Alone and the Scorching Iron Scepter. Alone was a knight from an eastern land who took interest in the local lord during his travel and wanted to aid him in his nation-founding endeavor. After a Pyrrhic victory, the lord found the Scorching Iron Scepter. The game doesn't explain how this tool worked, but essentially it could produce infinite iron. With this, the lord began building a formidable army. Soon he would be known as the Iron King because he just had too much iron, and no other land could match his mighty army. But his obsession with power didn't just stop there. When his kingdom suffered from the undead curse, he rounded up all the undeads and confined them in the Huntsman Copse, where the king himself and his knights would hunt the undeads like animals. On top of that, the Iron King built the Undead Purgatory, where a chariot would run in circle forever, grinding undeads into mincemeat for all eternity until they're just bones. The Iron King has dominated the land through warfare, so he thought he could dominate the dead with the same brutality. Obviously this didn't work either, since most of his loyal servants also turned into undeads and eventually hollow, forming the Skeleton Kings deep in the Huntsman Corps. Yet his desire to conquer didn't just stop there. After losing his best knight and friend, Sir Alon, the Iron King sought out to make a powerful Iron Warrior to solidify his power once more. To prove that he could dominate even life, the Iron King weaved a soul into the Iron Warrior so that it could have a mind of its own. What he didn't know is that he just gave the body to a demon, and it killed him with one strike. The Iron King's great soul was then possessed by an evil being of the deep, turning him into the hulking demon that we fought in the Iron Keep. His entire kingdom was also swallowed up by the lava from underneath. The Iron King's obsession with power was the fuel for his ascension, and also his undoing. Vendrick and Aldias are also victims of their obsession. Vendrick was obsessed with curing the undead curse and preserving his kingdom, while Aldia was consumed by immortality. When the curse first appeared in Drangleic, King Vendrick and his brother Aldia poured time and resources into soul research to find solution. Slowly, this led to experiments on all kinds of animals, monsters, and even humans. Despite the great progress they made, they only created monstrosities like the monsters in Aldia's manor, the Primal Knights, and so on. Vendrick was aware of the light and darkness cycle. He knows that using himself to relink the fire is only a temporary method to keep the darkness back. After exhausting all of his options, Vendrick decided to doom his kingdom to an agonizing eternal state of dying, while he himself went hollow in the undead crypt. His idea of breaking the cycle was tainted by his obsession to maintain this order of the world. Such contradiction can of course yield no answer. When the game ends, the player gets a choice: either ascend the throne and begin the cycle anew, or deny it and let the darkness set in. Vendrick had this choice too, seeing that he also defeated the four great beings just like the player, but he couldn't make the final decision to end the cycle of light and darkness forever because he still clung to the idea of preserving the world order as is. Aldia, on the other hand, somehow managed to leave humanity behind and merge with the primal fire. After each major boss, we would light up a primal bonfire, allowing us to talk to him. On the surface, it looks like Aldia has achieved his goal of immortality, but all he did was connecting himself to the first flame. If someone decides to rekindle it, he will be forced to witness the cycle of light and darkness again, where everything would eventually be consumed by the undead curse. And if someone decides to just let the fire fade, then he's fading with it too. That's why he laments the first linking of the flame, calling it the first sin. Gwyn, the first Lord of Light, defiled the natural cycle by burning his soul to extend the fire, and that doomed the world into this man-made cycle of keeping the flame going as long as possible. The only true way to break the cycle is to let nature take its course, which both of these men failed to see because of their obsession with life and the preservation of it. Dark Souls 2 is certainly a game of all time. Despite the okay-ish gameplay with some questionable design choices, the game left a very strong impression in me with its story and themes. I had a good time playing through the game semi-blind, and Dark Souls 1 has steeled my resolve enough that I didn't punch a wall playing the game. It's clear to see that Dark Souls 2 wasn't a bad game. It has some great ideas for both stories and gameplay, most of it is just severely undercooked. But I'm very happy to see a lot of interesting designs in Dark Souls 2 made their way to other games like Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, and even Elden Ring. So, for the final verdict, Dark Souls 2 was not that bad, but it's still an acquired taste kind of game. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Let's check out my Dark Souls 1 video and I'll see you there. Peace!